Welcome everyone to our video today. When we think of ancient Greece, the first thing that comes to mind is probably a world full of magical myths, where gods reign on Mount Olympus, goddesses with extraordinary beauty, and heroes with extraordinary power. We are all too familiar with the image of Zeus, the supreme god with thunder in his hand, the ruler of the sky, or Hera, the queen of the gods. Then we have Apollo, the god of light and art, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, and Zeus. And it's not just the characters, it's the stories that have been deeply ingrained in our subconscious. Who among us hasn't heard of the legendary Trojan War, about the giant wooden horse that helped the Greeks win, or the 12 labors of Hercules, the seemingly impossible series of tasks that this mighty hero had to overcome? And we can't forget the story of the mysterious Pandora's box, which opened up all the world's calamities, but also kept hope at the bottom of the box. These stories, whether told in the form of books, movies, or even video games, have a strange appeal. We are drawn to the dramatic adventures, the heroic battles, the star-crossed love affairs, and the profound lessons about life. But have you ever wondered, where do these great stories really come from? Are they just products of pure imagination, or are they rooted in history, natural influences, and the complex evolution of human culture? In this video, we take a fascinating journey to discover the hidden origins and surprising elements that have shaped the treasure trove of Greek mythology we know today. Join me as we explore whether these familiar stories really began the way we think they did. Welcome back to our journey. In the previous part, we reviewed the familiar Greek myths and their iconic gods and heroes. Now we will dig deeper, beyond the mythological world, to discover a truth that may surprise many people. Greek myths are not just products of pure imagination, but are also deeply shaped by history and what actually happened in the real world. Let's start with one of the greatest stories of all, the Trojan War. For centuries, the story of the 10-year war, the giant wooden horse, and the fall of the mighty city of Troy was thought to be a complete fiction, a masterpiece of Homer. However, in the late 19th century, a man named Heinrich Schliemann, an enthusiastic amateur archaeologist, shocked the world. Using Homer's own writings, Schliemann set out on a quest and eventually unearthed the ruins of an ancient city at a site called Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. What Schliemann found, layers of cities built over time, showing signs of destruction and war, provided compelling evidence that Troy may have actually existed. And more importantly, a large-scale conflict, perhaps similar to the Trojan War described in the epic, is entirely possible. This is not to say that every detail of the Iliad is historical fact. There is no evidence of direct divine intervention or Achilles being immortal. But the idea of a war for power, resources, and control of trade between Bronze Age kingdoms in the Aegean is plausible. Not only wars, but also natural disasters played an important role in the formation of myths. Think of earthquakes, tsunamis, or volcanic eruptions, devastating phenomena that ancient people could not explain with science. Out of fear and helplessness, they attributed these events to the gods. For example, when the earth shook violently, someone was responsible, and it was Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes, who angrily swung his trident. Or great floods, long droughts, all were seen as punishments or tests from the gods. These stories not only helped ancient people make sense of the world around them, but also served as a way for them to try to control their fear by praying and offering sacrifices to appease the anger of the gods. Now let's look at geography. The Greek landmass, with its varied terrain, long coastlines, numerous islands, and majestic mountain ranges, has been not only the setting but also the direct inspiration for many myths. Look at the Aegean Sea. This sea was not only an important trade route but also an indispensable part of the lives of the ancient Greeks. With countless islands, dangerous straits, and sudden storms, the sea became an entity that both gave life through fish, trade, and brought danger, storms, shipwrecks. It is no surprise that Poseidon became one of the most powerful gods, ruling over the entire sea world. Seafaring adventures, cursed islands, strange sea creatures like the sirens or Scylla and Charybdis all reflect the complex and awe-inspiring relationship that the Greeks had with the sea. The story of Odysseus and his arduous return journey across the sea is a prime example of the importance of the sea in their imagination. And of course, Mount Olympus. The highest mountain in Greece, often shrouded in clouds, became the perfect home for the supreme gods. The majestic, isolated, and mysterious nature of Olympus made it a symbol of power and divinity. The fact that the gods lived on top of a mountain not only demonstrated their superiority over humans, but also reflected the Greeks' reverence for majestic natural places, seeing them as places where the mortal and divine worlds intersected. Even other real-life places like the city of Athens, Sparta, or the island of Crete all played their own roles in mythology, serving as the setting for adventures, ancient kingdoms, or the birthplace of gods and heroes. Now, let's dive deeper into the historical roots, exploring the influence of the pre-Greek civilizations that existed before ancient Greece really took shape. Two notable names here are the Minoan and Mycenaean civilizations, brilliant cultures that laid the foundation for many of the mythological elements that came after. Let's start with the Minoan civilization, which flourished on the island of Crete from around 2700 to 1450 BC. The Minoans are famous for their massive and elaborate palaces, like Knossos, which are believed to have inspired the story of the Minotaur's labyrinth. The Palace of Knossos was actually a complex structure with hundreds of rooms and winding corridors, a true labyrinth in the ancient sense. The Minoans also had a religion centered on goddesses and symbols like bulls, often featured in bull-jumping rituals, and snakes. It's not hard to see how these images influence the myths of the Minotaur, a bull-headed monster with a human body trapped in a labyrinth, or later stories of the snake goddesses of Greek mythology. The Minoan connection to the Minotaur myth is a classic example of how a real structure has become mythologized. Next came the Mycenaean civilization, which flourished on the Greek mainland from about 1600 to 1100 BC. Unlike the Minoans, who emphasized peace and trade, the Mycenaeans were fierce warriors, living in fortified cities built on hills, with huge stone walls that the Greeks later called Cyclops architecture, which they believed could only have been built by one-eyed giants. Places like Mycenae and Tiryns are testaments to their military prowess. It was these Mycenaean kingdoms, with powerful kings like Agamemnon, king of Mycenae in the Trojan epic, that served as the setting and direct inspiration for the heroic epics of the Trojan War and the adventures of the heroes of that period. Archaeologists have found abundant evidence of warrior culture, weapons, and military art in Mycenaean sites, further strengthening this connection. And interestingly, Greek mythology did not only borrow from pre-Greek civilizations. It also had strong interactions with other neighboring cultures such as ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia. Through trade, war, and cultural contact, the Greeks absorbed many elements from their legends and beliefs, then transformed them to suit their own context and thinking. For example, some scholars believe that the concepts of creation, the first gods, or even some monsters in Greek mythology may have originated from Mesopotamian or Egyptian stories. This shows that Greek mythology is not an independent entity, born on its own, but a giant picture woven from countless historical, geographical, and cultural threads. It is a testament to the dynamism of the human imagination, always seeking to explain the world, record important events, and connect ourselves to our roots. Understanding these historical layers does not diminish the beauty or appeal of myths, but on the contrary, it makes them deeper, richer, and more real than ever. We realize that behind the fairy tales of gods and heroes, there are always the shadows of real people, real events, and civilizations that once existed on this land. Welcome back. If in the previous part, we lifted the curtain of history to see that Greek mythology is deeply rooted in real events and civilizations, now we will turn our eyes to the world around us, to the vast and magical power of nature. The ancient Greeks lived in a world where science was still in its infancy. They had to face directly the powerful natural phenomena, from fierce storms, ferocious tsunamis, to the growth of crops or the aridity of the land. Without the scientific explanations we have today, the only way for them to understand and feel in control of the world was to personify these phenomena into gods, goddesses, and mythical creatures. This is where the power of nature blends intimately and poetically into mythology. Let's start with the ultimate god, Zeus. Why is Zeus the god of thunder? Simply because thunder and lightning are some of the most majestic and terrifying natural phenomena humans have ever witnessed. A bolt of lightning can tear the sky apart, a downpour can change the course of an entire season, or even cause devastating floods. Its randomness, destructive power, and ability to change the landscape convinced the Greeks that only a supreme, all-powerful force could control it. And so Zeus was born, the god with the lightning bolt, the ultimate symbol of power, who could inflict punishment or blessing at will. When a storm came, the Greeks didn't just see rain and wind, they saw anger or a warning from Zeus himself. Next is Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. The Greeks were a people closely associated with the sea. The sea provided a source of seafood, a vital trade route, but it was also a volatile entity. Huge waves could sink an entire fleet, and sea storms could take the lives of hundreds of sailors. And not only the sea, the Greek land was also located on the seismic belt, so earthquakes were a constant fear. So, Poseidon was imagined as a god who could make the ground shake, create tsunamis, or make the sea calm. When a ship was in trouble at sea, it was not just bad weather, but Poseidon was angry. When an earthquake occurred, it was Poseidon stabbing the ground with his trident. Or consider Hephaestus, the crippled but brilliant blacksmith god. He is often associated with volcanoes, mountains that spew out molten lava, ash, and poisonous gases. To the ancients, this was an image of a giant underground forge where some god worked with fire and metal. Hephaestus, with his imperfect body but his deft hands creating masterpieces, became the embodiment of the destructive yet creative power of volcanoes and the process of forging metal. And there is no missing the connection between the cycle of the seasons and the story of Demeter, the goddess of agriculture, and her daughter, Persephone. The story of Persephone being taken to the underworld by Hades and Demeter's suffering created the 4 seasons. When Persephone was in the underworld, Demeter was sad, the plants withered, which was winter. When Persephone returned to her mother, Demeter was happy, the plants flourished, which was spring and summer. This story not only romanticized the natural cycle of plants, but also reflected the Greeks' deep dependence on agriculture and their fear of famine if the crops failed. More than awe or scientific explanation, the natural world has been an endless source of mythological beauty and mystery. The breathtaking beauty of the Mediterranean landscape, with its rolling green hills, ancient oak and olive groves, rugged but picturesque rocky coastlines, and dark, mysterious caves, all made for the perfect setting for mythological stories. Clear streams and murmuring waterfalls were home to naiads. Dense forests were the realm of satyrs and dryads, where Pan, the half-goat, half-man god, played his flute and hunted. Even real places like the Castalia Springs on Mount Parnassus became sacred, inspiring poets and prophets, blessed by Apollo. The Greeks were also aware of the unpredictable and sometimes brutal power of nature. Majestic mountains could cause landslides, gentle rivers could suddenly overflow their banks. Their dependence on nature for survival led them to develop a relationship of both reverence and wariness. Mythology was their way of dealing with that uncertainty. Stories of monsters like the Medusa, the Hydra, or the Chimera may have reflected their fear of dangerous wild creatures or unknown dangers in the wild. They also provided a way for them to make sense of the strange things they encountered in the natural world, from unusual-looking animals to unique geological phenomena. And finally, it is impossible not to mention the role of animals in Greek mythology and the profound symbolic meanings they bring. Animals do not just appear simply, but often represent an attribute, a god, or a lesson. For example, the owl, a nocturnal bird with large, round, sharp eyes, has become an inseparable symbol of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and intelligence. Owls have the ability to see in the dark, symbolizing the ability to see through the nature of the problem, insight, and knowledge. Or the lion, A brave, powerful animal is often associated with Hercules and his extraordinary strength. The Nemean lion skin became Hercules' signature costume, symbolizing his indomitable strength and courage when facing the most difficult challenges. The eagle, with its ability to soar and its keen eyes, is Zeus's sacred bird, symbolizing the supreme power and all-seeing vision of the god of the sky. When Zeus wants to convey a message or carry out his intentions, he sometimes transforms into an eagle. The snake, a controversial but meaningful animal, appears in many different contexts. It can be a symbol of wisdom and healing, like the rod of Asclepius, but it can also be a symbol of danger, death, and rebirth, like the story of Medusa with snake hair. The shedding of the snake's skin symbolizes renewal and regeneration. Even horses, especially winged horses like Pegasus, or the sea horses ridden by Poseidon, symbolize speed, strength, and freedom. Horses are also symbols of war and military power. These animals are not just decorative elements in mythology. They were a bridge between the human world and the supernatural world, a way for the ancient Greeks to interpret the characteristics and nature of nature through the lens of stories. They offered lessons about morality, strength, wisdom, and the relationship between humans and their environment. Welcome back to our journey into the surprising origins of Greek mythology. We have gone through history and discovered its deep connection to the natural world. Now we will move on to an equally important aspect, the evolution of the myths themselves over time, how they were passed down orally, written down, and became an integral part of Greek culture. Myths are not a static, unchanging collection, but rather like a flowing river, constantly being added to and changed over time. Let's follow the flow of time, starting from the earliest times. The Archaic period, about 800 to 480 BC, is the period when legends and folk tales began to take shape more clearly. At this time, Greece was not yet a unified country, but a collection of many city-states and small communities. Myths were often local in nature, associated with a hero or a guardian deity of a specific land. They were told through many generations, often orally, and served the religious rituals and beliefs of the community. Myths at this stage were still relatively primitive, not tightly systematized, and could have many different versions depending on each village or tribe. This was the period when the seeds of mythology were sown and began to sprout. Entering the classical period, about 480 to 323 BC, Greek mythology really exploded and reached its peak. This was the golden age of Athens, the cultural, political, and philosophical center of Greece. Myths were no longer just oral stories, but were systematized, elaborated, and developed strongly through new forms of art and thought. Philosophers began to ponder their meaning. Sculptors created perfect statues of gods, and especially the birth of drama, tragedy, and comedy. The tragedies of great writers such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides used myths as their main plots, but they also explored profound themes of fate, morality, justice, and human nature. For example, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex not only retold the story of Oedipus killing his father and marrying his mother, but also delved into the concepts of fate and free will. Through drama, myths became more vivid, more accessible to the public, and were infused with new philosophical depth. This was the period when myths were refined, reaching their most beautiful and influential form. Then we come to the Hellenistic period, c. 323 BC to 31 BC. After the conquest of Alexander the Great, Greek mythology was no longer limited to the borders of Greece but spread throughout the Mediterranean and Near Eastern world. As Greek culture interacted with Egyptian, Persian, and other Eastern cultures, mythology also began to change. New elements were added. Some Greek gods were assimilated with local gods, and sometimes stories were adapted to suit the context and tastes of new lands. The diversity and richness of mythology multiplied during this period. The most important thing to understand about the evolution of myths is that they were originally transmitted primarily through oral tradition, or oral tradition. Before writing became widespread and works were written down, myths were told and retold from generation to generation, at festivals, at feasts, or simply during evening gatherings. It is this oral tradition that gives myths their flexibility and variety. Think of it this way. Each storyteller, depending on his memory, talent, and purpose, might add, subtract, or emphasize certain details. A story about Hercules told in Sparta might be slightly different from a story told in Athens. A god might have multiple genealogies or actions. This explains why we often encounter different versions of the same myth today. For example, the death of Achilles or the fate of Helen of Troy. Each variant is part of a larger picture, reflecting the creativity and adaptation of different communities. However, it was thanks to the great efforts of a number of outstanding individuals that Greek mythology was recorded, from which it took on a relatively stable form and was more widely disseminated. The two most prominent names here are Homer and Hesiod. Homer, who is considered to be the author of the two greatest epics of all time, Iliad and Odyssey. Although there is much debate about whether Homer was a single person or a collection of many authors, the enormous influence of these two works cannot be denied. In the Iliad, Homer systematized and shaped the story of the Trojan War, focusing on the final days of the war, the anger of Achilles, and the tragic fate of Hector. He not only recounted the events, but also deeply portrayed the personalities of the characters, from Achilles' pride, Hector's courage, to the intervention of the gods on Olympus. The Iliad became a foundation for many later stories and characters. The Odyssey tells the story of Odysseus' arduous journey back to his homeland of Ithaca after the Trojan War. Through his encounters with Cyclops, sirens, and witches, Homer incorporates fantastical mythological elements into his work, along with lessons about perseverance, loyalty, and wisdom. These two works of Homer are not only great works of literature, but also serve to unify the existing legends. They provided a common framework for stories and characters, helping to shape the image of gods and heroes in the Greek mind. Although variations still exist, Homer's versions became the standard, guiding the way for later authors and artists. Contemporary with Homer, but in a different style, we have Hesiod. In his work Theogony, Hesiod did an extraordinary job. He systematized the genealogy of the Greek gods, from the first primordial gods such as Chaos, Gaia, Uranus, to the Olympians. He recounted how the world was created, how the gods gained power from their predecessors, and the complex relationships between them. Theogony is an invaluable source for understanding the theology and cosmology of the ancient Greeks. The emergence of epic poets such as Homer and Hesiod, along with the great playwrights, marked a major turning point in the evolution of myth. From fragmentary oral stories, they were written down, organized, and transmitted more widely. This not only preserved the stories over millennia, but also allowed them to be analyzed, interpreted, and became the basis for countless later works of literature, art, and philosophy. Thus, Greek myths are not a fixed stone, but a living, constantly changing organism. They were born from the earliest human experiences, nurtured by oral tradition, shaped and recorded by great minds, and adapted through each historical period. It is this evolution that has given Greek myths the enduring vitality that has allowed them to survive thousands of years and still resonate today. Welcome to the final leg of our journey into the surprising origins of ancient Greek mythology. We've gone back in time, exploring the historical roots and profound influences of nature on these stories, as well as how they've evolved over thousands of years. Now, let's look ahead and discover something even more amazing: the timeless legacy of Greek mythology that has and will continue to shape Western culture, permeating every corner of our modern lives. It is no exaggeration to say that Greek mythology is one of the most important foundations of Western culture. Its influence extends across all areas, from the greatest works to everyday expressions. In literature, this influence is most evident. From ancient Rome with poets like Virgil, whose Aeneid was inspired by the Iliad and Odyssey, to the Renaissance, writers like Dante and Shakespeare found inspiration in Greek gods and heroes. To this day, we still see the shadow of mythology in modern novels, plays, and poetry. The motifs of tragic fate, ill-fated love, extraordinary courage, and challenging adventures have all been exploited perfectly by Greek mythology thousands of years ago. In the visual arts, Greek mythology has provided a rich reservoir of themes and iconography. This can be seen in the exquisite sculptures of the ancient Greeks, where gods were carved with ideal beauty and superhuman strength. The European Renaissance saw an explosion of artwork inspired by mythology. Paintings by Botticelli, Michelangelo, and Raphael all depict gods and goddesses with great delicacy and expression. In later periods, such as Baroque, Neoclassical, and even modern art, artists continued to reinterpret myths, transform them, and reinterpret them in their own ways. And in architecture, look at the Doric, Ionic, Corinthian columns, or temples like the Parthenon. These architectural styles are not just physical legacies, but also symbols of balance, harmony, and classical beauty, and have had a profound influence on Western architecture. From government buildings, to museums, to luxury villas, you can see Greek columns all over the world, testament to their enduring influence. And they are present in film and television, modern literature, and even the world of video games. So after all that we have explored, I want you to realize one thing. Greek mythology is not just a distant past. It is a living heritage waiting for you to explore and interact with it in your own way. If you have not yet immersed yourself in this world, now is the time to start. Try rereading the Iliad and Odyssey. There are many easy-to-read modern translations. Explore the tragedies of Sophocles or Euripides. Watch movies or TV series inspired by mythology. Or even play a video game to experience the adventure in your own way. Each approach will open a new door for you to feel and understand more deeply about this great cultural treasure. You want to learn something new every day? This channel is for you. Subscribe to get the latest tutorials and lessons.